The sky over my house turned dark at noon, and that was the first sign something had gone terribly wrong. I was fixing a loose panel on my water collector when the light dropped, like someone had thrown a blanket over the sun. I looked up, expecting storm clouds. Instead, I saw a shape too smooth to be natural, too large to be anything from this colony, hanging silent above the tree line. My hands went cold before my mind caught up with what my eyes were telling me. My name is Daniel Cole. I live alone on the edge of a farming settlement called Mirren's Rest, 3 days from the nearest trade station by shuttle. I chose this place because nobody here asks questions about my past. I chose it because after everything that happened on Korvath Station 10 years ago, I wanted a life with no ceilings that could fall on me, and no doors that could open without warning. That second part didn't work out. The shape in the sky descended without a sound, which was the wrong kind of quiet. Ships that size should shake the ground when they move, should throw dust and noise ahead of them like a warning. This one didn't. It came down in the empty field behind my house, as gently as a leaf landing on water, and I stood there with a wrench still in my hand, watching a hull the color of dried blood settle onto the grass. I should have run. Every instinct I'd trained into myself during my years working alongside the fleet told me to run. Instead, I stood frozen, because I recognized the markings on that hull. Curved lines, layered like scales, arranged in patterns that weren't writing exactly, more like the visible pulse of a living thing. I hadn't seen those markings in 10 years. I had hoped I would never see them again. A seam opened in the side of the ship, no ramp, no mechanical groan, just a gap that widened like a wound, closing in reverse. Steam rolled out into the cold afternoon air, and something stepped through it. She was taller than the doorway should have allowed, though I realized after a moment that she had lowered her head to fit. Her body was built along insectoid lines, but there was nothing crude or monstrous about her. Deep violet plating wrapped her limbs in overlapping segments that caught the weak sunlight and threw it back in soft, oil-slick colors. 4 arms, 2 built for strength and 2 built for precision, moved with an economy that suggested centuries of controlled grace. Her head was crowned with folded structures that might have been sensory organs or might have been ceremonial, I never quite learned which, and her eyes, 6 of them arranged in a gentle arc, all turned toward me at once. I had met her before. I had known her voice before it ever learned to speak my language. Back then she had no true name that human throats could pronounce, only a designation, a string of clicks and low tones that our translation systems rendered as sovereign mother of the second spiral. I had called her that for months, before she gave me something else, something private, something I buried along with everything else from that station. Vesa, I said, and my voice cracked on the single syllable. She tilted her head, and 4 of her arms folded against her chest in a gesture I remembered meant contentment, or perhaps relief. The 2 were close enough in her people's language that I never fully separated them. Daniel Cole, she said. Her translator had improved since I'd last heard it speak. The words came out smooth, warm, almost gentle, wrapped around an accent that still carried the low resonance of her natural voice underneath. I missed you, human. It is time to return. I did not move. I could not have told you, in that moment, whether my heart was pounding from fear or from something older and more complicated that I had spent a decade trying to forget. Return where? I said, because it was the only question my mind could form. To the spiral, she said, as if the answer were obvious, as if 10 years and half a galaxy hadn't passed between the last time I saw her and this moment standing in my own backyard with a wrench in my hand and my life quietly falling apart around me. I want to explain, before I go further, that I was not a soldier. I was not a diplomat in the formal sense, not someone Earth's government would ever have chosen to send if they'd known what would happen. I was a linguist, one of maybe 200 humans in the entire fleet who could work directly with non-human vocal and gestural patterns without a machine doing all the thinking for us. I was good at my job. I was, if I am honest, better at it than almost anyone else assigned to the Korvath exchange program, and that is exactly why they sent me to live among the hive for 11 months with almost no oversight and almost no support. I did not know, when I accepted that assignment, that the hive did not simply learn languages the way humans do. I did not know that for a species whose entire social structure ran on chemical bonding and collective memory, learning to understand a human meant something closer to adoption than translation. I did not know that the woman standing in front of me now, the sovereign mother of an empire that spanned 11 star systems, had spent 11 months quietly, patiently, deliberately weaving me into the fabric of her hive's memory in a way that could not simply be undone by putting distance between us. I found all of this out the hard way, near the end of my assignment, when I tried to leave. "I can't go anywhere with you," I said, taking a step back toward my door. It was a foolish, reflexive motion, the kind of thing a person does when their body wants an exit, even though their mind knows there isn't one. "I have a life here. This isn't Korvath. That was a long time ago." Vessa's arms unfolded slightly, and something in her posture softened, though I could not have told you exactly what changed. Perhaps it was in the angle of her head, or the way the plates along her shoulders settled lower. "Time moves differently for us than for you," she said. "For my hive, no time has passed at all. You are still standing in the translation chamber on Korvath Station, telling me the story of your mother's garden. You are still the human who stayed awake 3 nights to learn the morning song of my first daughter's naming. You never left Daniel Cole, not in the place that matters." I felt something crack open in my chest, an old door I had nailed shut a long time ago, and behind it came a flood of memory I had spent 10 years trying to keep contained. The smell of the hive's central chamber, warm and mineral, like rain on hot stone. The sound of 10,000 voices humming in unison during the great gatherings. The particular, careful way Vessa used to fold 2 of her arms around my shoulders when I was frightened, not to trap me, but to steady me, the way you might hold something fragile that you were afraid the universe would break. I had left Korvath Station without saying goodbye to her. I had told myself it was because the assignment was over, because my orders came through, because there was nothing more for me to do there. That was the story I told everyone, including myself, for 10 years. It was not the truth. The truth was that on my last night on that station, Vessa had asked me a question I did not have the courage to answer, and rather than face it, I had packed my things at 3 in the morning and taken the first transport out, and I had never once looked back at the station, shrinking behind me in the viewport, because I knew if I looked, I would turn the ship around. "You have a consort anchor bond with me," I said slowly, working through the pieces of information I had spent a decade refusing to organize into a coherent shape. "That's what this is. That's why you're here." "You knew," Vessa said, and there was something in her voice that might have been surprise, or might have been sorrow. "You have always known." "I suspected," I admitted. "I read enough of your people's records to understand the shape of it, even if I never let myself finish the thought. I told myself it wasn't real. I told myself humans and hivekin couldn't form a true bond, that the translators were exaggerating, that it was ceremonial language and nothing more." "It is not ceremonial," Vessa said. "It is the deepest bond my people can form. It does not fade with distance. It does not fade with time. It has been 10 of your years, Daniel Cole, and I have felt the shape of your absence in every waking moment and every dream since the door of that station closed behind you." I sat down on the porch step because my legs would no longer hold the weight of what I was hearing. The wrench slipped out of my hand and landed in the dirt without a sound that mattered. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment, because it would be easy to make this simpler than it was. It would be easy to say I felt only fear, or only guilt, or only the particular dread of a man realizing his quiet life was about to be taken apart piece by piece. But underneath all of that, buried so deep I had almost convinced myself it had died there, was something else, something warm. Something that recognized her voice, the way a person recognizes home even after years away, even after telling themselves they never wanted to go back. I had missed her too. I had simply never allowed myself to say it out loud, not even to myself, not even in the privacy of my own thoughts in the dark. "Why now?" I asked. 10 years, Vessa. Why did you wait 10 years to come find me?" She was quiet for a long moment, and in that silence, I noticed things about her I hadn't let myself see yet. the faint tremor along the edges of her lower arms, the dulled color of certain plates near her collar that I remembered used to shimmer bright gold when she was well. She looked tired, in whatever way her physiology allowed for tiredness, and older than the years should have made her. "I did not come sooner because I believed I was protecting you," she said finally. "There are those among my own people, and among the other powers of this region, who would see a bond between a sovereign mother and a human as a weakness to exploit or a threat to eliminate. I judged the risk to you too great, so I stayed away, and I told myself that distance was a kindness." And now, her 6 eyes dimmed slightly, the closest thing I had ever seen to a hivekin's version of grief. "Now the danger has found you regardless," she said, "and I have run out of time to protect you from a distance. There are forces moving against my hive, Daniel Cole, forces that have learned of our bond and mean to use it against both of us. I did not come today because I wished to disturb your peace. I came because your peace was already ending, whether I arrived or not, and I refuse to let you face what comes next without me at your side." Somewhere behind her, deep inside the hull of her ship, I heard a low sound, something between a groan and a heartbeat, and the light in the sky shifted, as if something enormous had just woken up and taken notice of us both. I did not know it yet, sitting on that porch step with dirt on my hands and a decade of buried feeling clawing its way back into daylight, but the quiet life I had built at Mirren's Rest was already gone. It had ended the moment that ship blotted out the sun, and nothing I said or did in the minutes that followed was going to change that. What I did not know, what I could not have known, was how far this was going to reach. I did not know that somewhere across the galaxy, alarms were already being raised in council chambers belonging to species who had never met me and never wanted to. I did not know that word of Vessa's ship leaving hive space had already traveled faster than either of us, carried by fear and rumor through channels neither of us controlled. I did not know that humanity's old, quiet reputation, the one nobody talked about openly, the one built on stories from wars fought before I was born, was about to be tested again because of a bond I had spent 10 years pretending did not exist. All I knew, in that moment, was that the woman I had once loved and left without a word was standing in my backyard, asking me to come back to a life I had run from, and telling me that the danger she had tried to shield me from had already arrived at my door. "Tell me everything," I said. "Start from the beginning. Don't leave anything out this time." Vessa lowered herself slowly until she was closer to my eye level, an old gesture between us, one that meant she was about to trust me with something heavy. "Then we should not speak of it here," she said, glancing once toward the horizon, toward something I could not yet see, but she clearly could. "Others are already coming, Daniel Cole, some to help, some to end us both before the truth of our bond can spread any further. I would rather explain everything inside my ship, where the walls still remember your voice, than out here where anyone might be listening." I looked past her, toward the darkened hull with its scarred, familiar markings, and felt the pull of a decade I had never truly escaped. Then I stood up, and for the first time in 10 years, I walked toward her instead of away. The moment I stepped through the seam in the hull, the ship sealed itself behind me with a sound like a held breath finally released, and the last light of the ordinary world I had built for myself disappeared, replaced by a warm, dim glow the color of old amber, and a silence so complete it felt like stepping into memory itself. I did not know yet that somewhere above the atmosphere, 3 unmarked vessels had already begun tracking Vessa's ship on long-range sensors. I did not know that within hours, word of a hive sovereign mother landing on an undefended human colony would reach ears in at least 4 different star systems, each with its own reasons to be afraid of what that meant. I did not know that the first knock on my door that afternoon was only the beginning of something the entire galaxy was about to feel the weight of. All I knew was that Vessa's hand, 4-fingered and warm despite its plated surface, closed gently around mine as the ship's interior lights rose to greet us, and for the first time in 10 years, I did not feel like running. I felt like I had finally stopped. The inside of the ship smelled exactly the way I remembered, warm and mineral, like rain falling on sun-heated stone, and that smell alone nearly brought me to my knees. Memory is a strange thing. I could forget the sound of my own mother's voice over the years, but I never forgot that smell, because it was tied to the 11 months of my life when I had felt more understood than at any other point before or since. Vesa led me through a corridor lined with soft amber light, and as we walked, I let myself remember, really remember, for the first time in a decade, how I had ended up on Korvath Station in the first place. I had been 26 years old, freshly certified as a xenolinguist, hungry to prove myself after years of being told by instructors that my instincts were too unconventional, too intuitive, not rigorous enough for formal fleet work. When the assignment came through, most of the applicants ahead of me turned it down. Korvath Station sat in neutral territory between human space and the edge of Hive Dominion, a place built specifically so that two species who barely understood each other could attempt, for the first time in recorded history, to speak without weapons pointed at each other's throats. Nobody wanted that posting. The risk was too high, the reward too uncertain, and the previous linguist assigned to the project had returned home after 4 months with nothing to show for her effort except a stack of failed reports and a diagnosis of severe anxiety that ended her career. I took the assignment because nobody else would, and because I believed, with the particular arrogance of a young man who had never truly failed at anything that mattered to him, that I could succeed where she had not. I arrived on Korvath Station expecting monsters. That is the honest truth, and I am not proud of it, but I will not pretend otherwise for the sake of telling a cleaner story. I had grown up on records of the last conflict, on grainy footage of Hivekin soldiers moving through ruined colonies with the eerie, coordinated silence of a single mind operating 1,000 bodies. I expected to spend 11 months negotiating with something closer to a natural disaster than a person. Vesa was the first Hivekin I ever met in person, and she shattered every assumption I carried within the first 10 minutes. She had been newly ascended to her role as sovereign mother of the second spiral when I arrived, young by her people's standards, carrying a weight of responsibility that would have crushed most humans I knew. Her predecessor, the sovereign mother before her, had died during the final months of the old conflict, and Vesa had inherited not just a title, but the accumulated grief and caution of an entire hive that had lost far too much to trust easily again. Our first conversation lasted 6 hours and accomplished almost nothing in terms of actual translation work. I remember sitting across from her in a chamber built specifically for the exchange program, my translation equipment failing to make sense of half of what she said, and instead of growing frustrated, she simply waited. She adjusted her pace. She repeated herself patiently, again and again, using simpler structures, watching my face for the exact moment understanding clicked into place, and when it finally did, she made a sound I would later learn was laughter, low and resonant, warm in a way I had never expected from something the fleet's briefing materials described as a hive mind predator. By the end of the first month, I understood more of the hive's structural language than any human before me. By the end of the third month, Vesa had begun inviting me into spaces reserved for her inner circle, gatherings I would later learn were meant only for hivekin who shared direct chemical and memory bonds with her. I did not understand, at the time, what it meant that she kept including me. I thought I was simply good at my job. I was wrong, and the truth of how wrong I was became clear during the 5th month, when Vesa's youngest daughter was born. Among the hive, birth is not a private, individual event the way it is for humans. It is a collective experience, shared through bonds of memory and sensation across the entire spiral, so that every hivekin connected to the sovereign mother experiences the birth alongside her, in real time, as though it were happening to them as well. It is considered the deepest possible expression of trust to allow an outsider into that experience, and in the history of the hive, it had never once been extended to a non-hive kin, let alone a human. Vesa extended it to me. I remember the night clearly, more clearly than almost any other memory from that station. She had come to find me in the small quarters I'd been given, near the translation wing, her 4 arms trembling with an anticipation I did not yet have the vocabulary to name, and she asked me, in halting, careful standard, whether I would sit with her during the birth. I said yes without understanding what I was agreeing to, and for the following 6 hours, through a connection I still do not fully understand, and Vesa herself has never fully explained, I felt what she felt. The pain of it, yes, but also the overwhelming, bottomless joy, the flood of relief when her daughter finally drew breath, the fierce, immediate love that swept through the entire spiral, like a wave breaking over rock. When it was over, Vesa looked at me with all 6 of her eyes, and she said something I did not understand until years later, something my translator rendered imperfectly as, "You are inside the memory now. There is no removing you." I thought it was a metaphor. I thought it was a way of saying I had become a trusted friend, a valued colleague, someone whose contribution to the hive would be remembered fondly after my assignment ended. I did not understand, could not have understood, that it was a statement of biological and social fact. I had been folded into the collective memory of an entire hive, bonded not just to Vesa, but to every hivekin who shared her connection, in a way that could never be undone, only ignored. The months that followed were, without exaggeration, the happiest of my life. I learned the hive's morning songs and their celebration rites. I learned to read the subtle shifts in Vesa's plating that told me more about her true feelings than any words could. I learned, slowly, carefully, without ever quite admitting it to myself in plain language, that I had fallen in love with a woman who was not human, who led an empire of 11 star systems, and who had woven me into the deepest fabric of her people's collective existence, without either of us ever discussing what that would mean once my assignment inevitably ended. The end came faster than either of us was ready for. In the 10th month, Earth's government, growing nervous about how deeply their linguist had integrated into hive society, began pressuring the exchange program to rotate me out early, worried that my reports had grown too favorable, too sympathetic, that I had lost the objectivity the mission required. I fought the decision as hard as I could through official channels, but bureaucracies do not care about the things that matter most to the people caught inside them, and by the start of the 11th month, my recall orders were finalized. I told myself I would tell Vesa properly. I told myself I would find the right words, the right moment, and explain everything, including the feelings I had never once spoken aloud. I had 11 months of courage stored up, and I told myself I would spend it all on that one conversation. Instead, on my final night on Korvath Station, Vesa came to my quarters unannounced, later than she ever had before, and she asked me the question I had been dreading and hoping for in equal measure. She asked me to stay, not as a linguist, not as a diplomat. She asked me to become her consort anchor, permanently, a bond that would tie my life to hers and to the hive for as long as either of us survived. She told me, with a vulnerability I had never seen from her before, not even during the birth of her daughter, that she had never asked such a thing of anyone in her entire life, human or hivekin, and that she did not know what she would do if I said no. I did not say no. I did not say yes either. I said I needed time to think, and then, like the coward I am not proud to have been, I used that time to pack my belongings in the dark and board the first transport off the station before dawn, leaving nothing behind but an official resignation letter and 10 years of silence. Standing in the corridor of Vesa's ship now, a decade later, watching the amber light play across walls that still smelled exactly the way I remembered, I finally understood the true weight of what I had done that night. I had not simply left a job. I had not simply ended a relationship the way humans end relationships, with awkward conversations and slowly fading contact. I had torn myself out of the collective memory of an entire civilization, and in doing so, I had left a wound in every single hivekin bonded to Vesa, a wound that apparently had never fully healed in 10 years, because bonds like ours were never designed to be broken. "You never told me," I said quietly, as we reached a wide chamber at the heart of the ship, walls curving upward into a domed ceiling patterned with the same scale-like markings I had seen on the hull outside. Vesa turned to face me fully, and for the first time since she had appeared in my backyard, I saw something in her posture that looked almost fragile. "I told myself the same story you told yourself," she said, "that it was easier this way, that you needed a normal life, free of hive politics and hive danger, and that my silence was a gift I was giving you. I did not tell you what happened after you left, because I did not want you to return out of guilt. I wanted you to return only if some part of you still wished to. What happened after I left? I asked, though some part of me already feared the answer. She was quiet for a long moment, and when she finally spoke, her voice had dropped low, resonant, carrying an old grief I recognized instantly, because I had carried a version of it myself for 10 years. For the first 2 years, I could not sleep without waking certain you had died somewhere out in human space, and that the silence I felt through our bond was the silence of your absence rather than merely distance. My advisors urged me to sever the connection entirely, to allow the bond to fade the way lesser attachments sometimes do among my people, and I refused every single time, because severing it would have meant accepting that you were truly, permanently gone. I sat down on a low bench built into the chamber wall, my legs unsteady beneath me, and I let her words settle over me like a weight I had earned and never paid. There is more, Vesa said, and something in her tone made the back of my neck go cold. The bond between us was never simply personal, Daniel Cole. When I chose you as my consort anchor, even before you accepted, the choice itself was recorded within Hive law, witnessed by my inner circle, bound into the treaty structures that govern relations between my spiral and 3 neighboring powers. My people believed, and still believe, that a sovereign mother's chosen bond reflects the stability of her entire rule. For 10 years, rivals within and beyond my hive have quietly used the unfinished nature of our bond, the fact that you left without formal severance and without formal completion, as evidence that my judgment could not be trusted, that my rule was built on an unstable foundation. You're saying my leaving hurt more than just you, I said slowly, the shape of the danger finally becoming clear. You're saying it hurt your entire position, your entire hive. I am saying, Vesa answered, that for 10 years I have held together a peace that many believed impossible, built partly on the strength my people saw in a bond they believed complete, and I am saying that certain powers who never wanted that peace to succeed have finally found the crack they needed to try to break it apart, and that crack, Daniel Cole, is you. Outside, somewhere beyond the hull, I heard a low tone ring out across the ship's systems, a sound Vesa's posture told me immediately was not good news. They have found us already, she said quietly, turning toward the sound, faster than I expected. We do not have as much time as I had hoped to explain everything gently. I stood up, feeling the old, familiar pull of purpose I had not felt in 10 quiet years at Mirren's Rest, a pull I realized now I had missed more than I ever let myself admit. Then stop being gentle, I said. Tell me what's coming, and tell me how we survive it. Vesa looked at me for a long moment, something like relief and something like fear moving together across her features, and then she began to explain exactly how deep the danger against us truly ran. There is a council, she said, leading me toward a curved wall that shimmered to life at her touch, revealing a star map dotted with soft points of light. 11 powers sit upon it, human included, though your people rarely attend in person. It was formed after the last great conflict to prevent another war from ever consuming this region of space again. I have sat upon that council since I ascended to my role, and for 10 years I have used my seat to argue for continued peace between my hive and every neighboring power, including yours. And someone on that council doesn't want peace, I said. Several someones, Vesa answered. A faction led by a power called the Drathan Concord believes that lasting peace between species, as different as hive and human, sets a dangerous precedent, one that threatens their own ambitions of expansion. For years they have searched for a way to discredit me, to prove to the rest of the council that my judgment cannot be trusted, that my rule invites instability rather than order. An unfinished consort anchor bond, abandoned by the human who accepted it, is precisely the kind of weakness they have been waiting to exploit. I looked at the star map, at the small cluster of lights representing Mirren's Rest, my quiet, unremarkable colony that had somehow become the center of something vast and dangerous without my permission. How did they find out about the bond in the first place? I asked. You said it was witnessed by your inner circle. That's not the same as public knowledge. Vesa's expression darkened, and I recognized, even across the vast gap between our species, the particular look of someone about to admit a betrayal. 6 months ago, one of my own advisors, a hive-kin named Threnna, who I trusted deeply, was captured during a border dispute along the edge of Drathan territory, she said. Under methods I will not describe to you, methods my people consider a violation deeper than death itself, she was made to reveal details of my private history, including the truth of our bond and your identity. I did not learn of this until 3 months later, when Drathan envoys began quietly circulating the information among sympathetic council members, always carefully, always deniably, always in whispers rather than open accusation. 3 months, I said. That's how long you've known someone might come after me. Yes, Vesa admitted, and there was real shame in her voice now, and I spent those 3 months arguing with my own advisors about whether to warn you at all. Some believed that contacting you would only draw more attention to the vulnerability, that my silence and your obscurity were the safest protection you could have. I believed, foolishly, that if I acted quickly enough, quietly enough, I could resolve the threat before it ever reached your doorstep. Clearly that didn't work, I said, gesturing toward the low tone still pulsing faintly through the ship's systems. No, Vesa agreed. 3 days ago, a Drathan scout vessel was detected entering human-controlled space, moving toward this exact system, using old exchange program records to trace your identity and location. I made the decision to reach you first, believing that my presence alone would be enough to protect you until we could resolve this properly through the council. I did not expect them to move as quickly as they have. As if her words had summoned it, the tone through the ship's systems sharpened into something more urgent, a rhythmic pulse that even I, with no formal hive military training, understood instinctively as an alarm. Vesa's 4 arms moved rapidly across the star map interface, and new points of light bloomed into view, 3 of them, moving in tight formation toward the outer edge of the system. Drathan signatures, she said, her voice tightening. They arrived faster than I calculated. They must have been tracking my ship since I departed hive space, waiting for the moment I revealed your location by landing here. What do they want? I asked, though some cold, honest part of me already suspected the answer. There are 2 outcomes that would satisfy them, Vesa said grimly. The first, and the one they would prefer, is to capture you alive and present you before the council as evidence, proof that a sovereign mother's bond can be so carelessly abandoned that the abandoned party can be seized without consequence, without your government or mine mounting any meaningful defense. Such a spectacle would humiliate me before the entire council and likely end my rule. And the second outcome, I asked, though I already knew I would not like it. Vesa did not answer immediately, and her silence told me everything her words had not. The second outcome, she finally said, is that you do not survive their attempt to reach you, and I am left to explain to the council why a human bonded to me died on an undefended colony while I stood beside him, unable to protect him. Either outcome accomplishes what the Drathan faction wants. Either outcome proves that my judgment cannot be trusted. I felt a strange, cold clarity settle over me, the kind of focus I remembered from the tensest negotiations back on Korvath Station, when panic would have ended everything, and only careful, deliberate thought had any chance of saving us. Then we don't let either outcome happen, I said. What defenses does this ship have? What can we do right now, in the next few minutes, before those 3 vessels arrive? Vesa looked at me, something shifting in her expression, an old respect I remembered well rekindling behind her eyes. This vessel is not built for combat, she admitted. It is a diplomatic transport, meant to carry a sovereign mother safely through neutral space, not to withstand a coordinated assault. We have defensive systems, but against 3 Drathan scout vessels working together, we would not survive an extended engagement. Then we don't fight, I said. We run, or we call for help, or both. I have already sent word to my spiral, Vesa said, but even at maximum speed, reinforcement from hive territory is at minimum 18 hours away, and I hesitate to contact your government directly because I do not know how deeply the Drathan have influenced human channels, nor how your leaders would react to learning the truth of our bond in the midst of an active crisis. I thought of Miran's Rest, of the quiet colonists who had no idea what was descending on their peaceful settlement, of the fact that whatever happened next was going to happen in the sky above people who had never asked to be part of any of this. "There's someone else," I said slowly, an old memory surfacing. "Someone who might help without going through official channels at all." Vesa turned to me fully, her attention sharp. "Who?" "Her name is Laura Bennett," I said. "She was my supervisor during the Corvette exchange program, back before it ended. She left the fleet a few years after I did, mostly because she disagreed with how the whole program was shut down and buried. Last I heard, she was flying independent cargo runs through this sector, and she keeps a channel open for people from the old program. If anyone still has contacts who would move fast and quiet, it's her. You believe she would help, even after all this time?" I thought about it honestly before answering, because Vesa deserved honesty more than reassurance in that moment. "I don't know for certain," I admitted, "but she was the only person from that program who ever told me she thought Earth was wrong to pull me out early. She believed in what we were building on Corvath Station. If anyone from my old life would understand why this matters, it's her." Vesa nodded slowly, already moving toward the communication array built into the chamber wall. "Then we contact her," she said, "and we pray that 10 years of silence has not erased whatever trust once existed between you." As she worked, I found myself staring at the star map, at the 3 points of light drawing steadily closer, and I felt the strange, vertiginous sensation of a quiet life ending, and an old, dangerous one beginning again, faster than I had time to process, faster than either Vesa or I were fully ready for. The channel opened with a burst of static, and a familiar voice, rougher than I remembered, but unmistakably hers, crackled through the chamber. "This is Bennett," the voice said, cautious, alert. "Who's calling on a priority frequency I haven't used in 10 years?" I stepped forward, my heart pounding, and spoke into the array. "Laura, it's Daniel Cole," I said. "I know this is going to sound impossible, but I need your help, and I don't have much time to explain." There was a long pause on the other end, long enough that I feared the connection had failed, and then Laura Bennett's voice returned, quieter, more careful, carrying a weight of memory I recognized instantly. "Cole," she said slowly, "I always wondered if I'd hear from you again. Tell me you're not calling because the thing we all suspected finally came knocking." "It did," I said. "She's here, Vesa. And there are 3 hostile vessels closing on my position right now, and I need every favor you've got left in this sector, because if they reach me first, it's not just my life on the line. It's the whole peace between our people and hers." Another pause, shorter this time, and when Laura spoke again, her voice had changed, sharpened into something I recognized from our old days on Corvath Station, the sound of a person deciding, in an instant, to stand and fight rather than stand aside. "Send me your coordinates," she said. "And Cole, whatever you did to end up in the middle of this, you're going to owe me the full story once we get you out alive." "Deal," I said, and for the first time since that shape had blotted out the sun above my house, I let myself believe, just slightly, that we might actually survive what was coming. Vesa transmitted our coordinates, and as the channel closed, she turned to me with an expression I had not seen on her in 10 years, something between hope and disbelief. "You still have people who would come for you," she said quietly, "even after everything." "I didn't know if I did," I admitted, "but I suppose we're about to find out." Outside, the 3 approaching vessels grew steadily closer on the star map, and somewhere far above the quiet fields of Mirren's Rest, the first true test of what remained between Vesa and me was about to begin. What I did not understand yet, standing in that amber-lit chamber with my pulse hammering against my ribs, was how far word of Vesa's arrival had already traveled beyond the 3 Drathan vessels bearing down on us. I would only piece the full picture together later, from fragments Laura told me and reports Vesa's own network gathered in the following hours, but the truth of it was staggering even in hindsight. The moment Vesa's ship had entered human-controlled space and set a course for an obscure colony most star charts barely listed by name, sensor arrays belonging to at least 6 different powers had flagged the movement. A sovereign mother did not simply leave Hive territory for casual reasons, and the moment her heading became clear, Quiet alarms had begun sounding in places far beyond the Drathan Concorde's war rooms. On a trade station 2 systems away, a retired fleet officer named Owen Blake had been halfway through a routine cargo inspection when the alert crossed his old, unofficial network channel, the same informal web of former Corvath program veterans that Laura Bennett still maintained. He had served as station security during my time on Corvath, had watched from a distance as I spent 11 months growing closer to a woman his superiors considered a calculated risk, and he had never forgotten the strange, quiet wonder of watching 2 species learn to trust each other for the first time in living memory. He told me later that he read the alert 3 times before he believed it. Then he closed his cargo manifest, told his crew he was taking personal leave, and set his ship's course for Mirren's Rest, without waiting for permission from anyone. He was not the only one. Across the sector, in bars and repair docks and quiet farming settlements not unlike my own, other names surfaced from the buried history of the Corvath exchange program. A woman named Ellen Marsh, who had worked as a medical liaison during the program's final months, and had once treated me for a fever that nearly ended the entire mission early. A pilot named Nathan Price, barely out of his 20s during his time on the station, who credited Vessa's intervention during a diplomatic crisis with saving his life and the lives of 40 other crew members aboard a damaged transport. A weathered engineer named Charlie Doyle, who had helped build the very translation equipment I once used to speak with Vessa for the first time, and who had always believed, quietly and stubbornly, that what we built on that station mattered more than the fleet ever gave it credit for. None of them had spoken to each other in years. Some of them had never met at all, connected only by the thin, invisible thread of having once been part of something the rest of the galaxy had chosen to forget. And yet, within hours of the alert crossing their old network, every one of them turned their ships toward the same quiet corner of space, drawn by a memory none of them had ever fully let go of. I did not know any of this yet, standing in Vessa's ship, watching 3 hostile vessels close in on our position. All I knew was the immediate, narrowing crisis in front of me, and the sound of Vessa's voice, low and steady, walking me through what little defense we had. "Their scout vessels favor speed over armor," she explained, her 4 arms moving across the star map with practiced precision. "If we can delay them, even briefly, we buy time for reinforcement to arrive, whether from your contact or from my own spiral." "Delay them how?" I asked. "You said this ship isn't built for combat." "It is not," Vessa agreed. "But it is built for diplomacy, and diplomacy has its own kind of weapon." She activated a wideband transmission array, and I realized, with a start, what she intended. "You're going to broadcast," I said, openly, "to everyone in range. The Drathan faction wants to discredit me quietly," Vessa said. "They want whispers and deniability, not open conflict witnessed by every power in this sector. If I broadcast the truth of what is happening here, openly, to any vessel or station capable of receiving it, I strip away the deniability they depend on. They cannot afford for this to become a public incident. And if they don't care about being seen, if they attack anyway?" Vessa's eyes dimmed briefly, a gesture I now understood as the closest her people came to a grim, resigned honesty. "Then we will have lost regardless of what I choose to do," she said. "But I would rather lose while forcing the truth into the light than lose quietly, the way they intend for us to." She opened the channel, and her voice, translated into a dozen languages simultaneously by systems far more advanced than anything I had worked with a decade ago, rang out across every frequency the ship could reach. "This is Vessa, Sovereign Mother of the Second Spiral," she said, her voice steady, despite everything I knew she must have been feeling. "I speak openly to any vessel receiving this transmission, human or otherwise. I have traveled to this system to protect a bonded member of my hive, a human named Daniel Cole, from unlawful pursuit by agents of the Drathan Concorde, who seek to use him as a weapon against the peace this council has spent a decade building. I ask any witness to this transmission to bear record of what follows, and I ask any who value that peace to stand with us now, while there is still time to prevent its collapse." The silence that followed felt endless, though it could only have lasted a few seconds. Then, across the star map, new signals began appearing, scattered at first, then multiplying, Dozens of vessels across the sector receiving and rebroadcasting Vessa's message, some out of solidarity, some simply out of the instinctive human need to witness history unfolding rather than let it pass unrecorded. "It's working," I said, watching the signals spread. "People are listening." "Listening is not the same as arriving in time," Vessa said quietly, her attention fixed on the 3 Drathan vessels, now close enough that their individual hull markings had become visible on our sensors. "We have perhaps 6 minutes before they reach firing range. I do not yet know if that is enough." I looked at the star map, at Laura Bennett's ship still hours away despite pushing her engines to their limit, at Owen Blake's vessel further still, at every scattered point of light representing someone who cared enough to come, but might not arrive in time to matter. And then, faintly at first, almost lost beneath the tension thrumming through the chamber, I heard something new, a low hum, resonant, familiar, rising from deep within the ship's own systems, distinct from any alarm or transmission Vessa had activated. "What is that?" I asked. Vessa went very still, her 4 arms freezing mid-motion, all 6 of her eyes widening in an expression I had never seen from her before. "That," she said slowly, disbelief coloring every word, "is the sound of the bond itself responding. Daniel Cole, I do not believe that signal came from my ship's systems at all." Before I could ask what she meant, the star map flickered, and new signatures began appearing at the very edge of our sensor range, moving fast, moving with purpose, arranged in a formation no scattered group of independent civilian vessels should have been capable of forming so quickly. I stared at the growing cluster of lights, my chest tightening with something I could not yet name, caught between the last edge of fear and the first fragile beginnings of hope. "Vessa," I said quietly, "what am I looking at?" She turned to me, and for the first time since she had stepped through the seam of her ship into my quiet backyard, I saw something on her face that looked almost like awe. "I believe," she said slowly, "that we are looking at the beginning of exactly the reputation the galaxy has always feared in your people, and never fully understood." The formation on the star map grew clearer by the second, and I counted, with mounting disbelief, no fewer than 9 vessels now converging on our position, none of them military, all of them moving with the kind of tight, deliberate coordination that should have taken hours of planning rather than the mere minutes that had passed since Vessa's broadcast went out. 9 ships, I said. 9 civilian ships against 3 Drathan scouts. Vessa, that's not enough to win a real engagement. "No," she agreed, "but it may be enough to make the Drathan commanders hesitate, and hesitation, in this situation, may be all we need." The comm array crackled again, and this time it was Laura Bennett's voice that came through, tighter now, more urgent, but carrying an unmistakable edge of something fierce beneath the tension. "Cole, listen to me," she said. "I put the word out the second you contacted me. Old program channel, the one we swore we'd never use unless it actually mattered." I did not expect this kind of response. There are people converging on your position from 3 different systems right now, people who haven't spoken to each other in years, people who barely knew each other on that station, and every single one of them turned their ship around the moment they heard Vessa's name. "Why?" I asked, though some part of me already suspected the answer even as I asked it. "Because we remember what that station meant," Laura said, her voice roughening with an emotion she rarely let show. "Because for 11 months, you and Vessa proved something the fleet's official reports never gave you credit for. You proved 2 species that had every reason to destroy each other could choose not to. Every person converging on your position right now believes that matters enough to risk their ship for it." I looked at Vessa, and I saw, reflected in her expression, the same disbelief I felt settling into my own chest. "They are not fleet," I said quietly. "They're not soldiers. They're farmers and cargo pilots and retired officers who left the service years ago. That is precisely why the Drathan commanders will hesitate," Vessa said. "A military response is expected. It can be planned around, accounted for, absorbed into a narrative of conflict they control. But civilians, ordinary people, arriving unbidden, unpaid, moved only by loyalty and memory, that is not a variable their strategists will have prepared for." On the star map, the 3 Drathan vessels slowed, their formation tightening defensively as the growing swarm of human ships closed the distance. I watched, my breath caught somewhere in my throat, as the tactical picture shifted in real time, uncertainty visibly rippling through the enemy formation. "They're recalculating," Vesa murmured, reading data streams I could not fully interpret myself. They did not anticipate this response. Their mission parameters likely assumed a quiet, contained operation against an undefended target. "We're not exactly defended," I pointed out. 9 unarmed civilian ships isn't a fleet, Vesa." "No," she agreed. "But perception matters as much as firepower in moments like this, and the Drathan cannot know, with certainty, how far this response might spread if they act now and are witnessed doing so." As if to underscore her point, the comm array lit up again, this time with a new voice, rougher, older, carrying the unmistakable cadence of someone who had spent decades in fleet service before walking away from it. "This is Owen Blake, formerly of Station Security, Korvath Exchange Program," the voice announced, broadcasting openly across the same wide channel Vesa had used moments before. "To any Drathan vessel receiving this transmission, be advised that this engagement is being witnessed and recorded by civilian craft from at least 3 separate systems, all of whom intend to relay everything that happens here to every media and diplomatic channel we can reach the moment this is over. Whatever you were sent here to accomplish quietly, that option no longer exists." I felt something shift in my chest, a strange, swelling mixture of pride and disbelief, watching people I had never met, and some I barely remembered, throwing themselves into danger for a stranger's cause simply because a decade-old memory told them it mattered. The Drathan formation held its position for a long, tense moment, and I found myself holding my breath alongside Vesa, watching the star map for any sign of what they intended to do next. Then, slowly, their formation began to shift, not toward us, but away, curving back toward the edge of the system, their engines flaring as they prepared to withdraw, rather than risk an engagement now certain to be witnessed by far more parties than their mission had ever accounted for. "They're retreating," I said, hardly daring to believe it. "For now," Vesa said carefully, though I could hear the relief threading through her measured tone. "This is not the end of the threat, Daniel Cole. It is only a delay, purchased by the loyalty of people who owed you nothing beyond memory. The Drathan faction will regroup, and they will return with a plan that accounts for what happened here today. But we have won ourselves time, and time is worth more right now than anything else we could have hoped for." Around us, the 9 civilian vessels began arranging themselves into a loose protective formation, no longer needed to intimidate a retreating enemy, but clearly unwilling to leave until they had seen the situation fully resolved. I watched their signatures on the star map, each one representing someone who had turned their life upside down on a moment's notice, and I felt the old, buried memory of what humanity's presence in that exchange program had truly meant finally rise fully to the surface of my understanding. "This is what they were afraid of all along," I said slowly, half to Vesa, half to myself, working through a realization that had been building since the moment those 9 ships appeared on our sensors. Not human weapons, not human fleets. This. The fact that when something we've claimed as ours is threatened, we don't calculate the odds first, we just come. Vesa turned to look at me fully, and something in her expression had softened into something I recognized from the earliest, gentlest days of our time together on Korvath Station. "Your people call yourselves the galaxy's nightmare in quiet moments, when you believe no other species is listening," she said. "I have heard the phrase whispered among your own fleet officers, always with a strange kind of pride beneath the caution. For years I did not understand why. I believed it referred to your capacity for violence, the wars your history is full of, the weapons your ships carry. Watching this unfold today, I believe I finally understand the truth of it." "And what's the truth?" I asked quietly. "The truth," Vesa said, "is that your people do not need armies to be dangerous. They need only to love something, or someone, deeply enough, and then anyone who threatens what you love learns very quickly that there is no calculation, no strategy, no rational cost analysis that will stop you from coming." I sat with that thought for a long moment, watching the retreating Drathan signatures fade toward the edge of our sensor range, watching 9 ordinary ships hold their protective formation around us without being asked, without being paid, moved by nothing but a decade-old memory and a stubborn, uncalculated loyalty. "They're not gone for good," I said finally, echoing Vessa's earlier warning. "The Drathan, this isn't over." "No," Vessa agreed. "It is only the first test. And I fear the council session that follows will prove far more dangerous than any single engagement in open space, because it will not be fought with ships and weapons, but with words, evidence, and the fragile trust of powers who have spent a decade waiting to see whether the peace we built could survive its first true test." I looked out at the star map one final time, at the loose, protective formation of ships holding steady around us, at names and faces from a buried decade of my life who had chosen, without hesitation, to answer a call I never expected anyone to hear. "Then we'd better be ready for it," I said. "Because, whatever comes next, I'm not running from it, not this time." Vessa's forearms folded gently, an old gesture of quiet relief I remembered from a decade ago, and for the first time since her ship had blotted out the sun above my house, I let myself believe, fully and without reservation, that whatever came next, we would face it together. The council session was scheduled for 2 days later, held aboard a neutral station positioned at the exact midpoint between human and hive territory, the same kind of careful, deliberate neutrality that had once made Korvath Station possible. Vessa explained the stakes to me during the journey there, her voice steady, but her plating dimmed with a tension I had rarely seen from her, even during our most difficult days a decade ago. "The Drathan faction will not present what happened at your colony as an attack," she said, as we sat together in the same amber-lit chamber where everything between us had first come rushing back. "They will present it as evidence of instability, proof that a sovereign mother's judgment has become compromised by an unresolved personal bond. They will argue that my presence at your colony, and the chaotic civilian response it provoked, demonstrates precisely the kind of unpredictable behavior the council should no longer tolerate from my spiral. So they're going to twist the fact that people showed up to protect us into evidence against you," I said, feeling old anger rise in my chest. "Yes," Vessa said simply, "and it is a clever strategy, because it requires no lie to be effective. Everything they will say happened, did happen. The only question the council must decide is what it means." I thought about that during the remainder of the journey, turning the problem over in my mind, the way I used to turn over difficult translation puzzles on Korvath Station, searching for the angle nobody else had considered yet. By the time we docked at the neutral station, I had an idea, though I was not certain Vessa would agree to it. "I want to speak before the council," I said, as we made our way toward the chamber where 11 powers would soon gather to decide the fate of a peace neither of us had asked to be responsible for. Not as your consort anchor, as myself, as the linguist who spent 11 months on Korvath Station and walked away from it, and who is standing here now to explain exactly why that mattered. Vessa stopped walking and turned to face me fully, something complicated moving behind her 6 eyes. "The council rarely permits individual humans to speak directly," she said carefully. "And if you do this, Daniel Cole, you will be placing yourself at the center of a debate that could reshape the terms of your own life, regardless of how it concludes. There will be no returning to Mirren's Rest afterward, not the way things were before. Whatever peace we build going forward, you will be part of its foundation, publicly and permanently." "I know," I said, and I found, to my own surprise, that the thought no longer frightened me the way it once had. "I spent 10 years running from exactly that kind of permanence, Vessa. I'm done running. If speaking honestly in front of that council is what it takes to protect the peace we built, and to protect you, then that's what I'm going to do." She studied me for a long moment, and then, slowly, she nodded. "Then I will request that the council hear you," she said, "though I cannot promise they will listen with open minds." The council chamber, when we finally entered it, was larger and colder than I had imagined, a vast circular room ringed with representatives from 11 different powers, each seated behind curved desks arranged in careful, deliberate distance from one another. I recognized human delegates among them, formal and cautious, clearly uncomfortable with the unusual circumstances that had brought them there. I recognized, too, the sharp, angular representatives of the Drathan Concord, seated with the confident posture of people who believed they had already won. Vesa spoke first, laying out the events at Mirren's Rest with careful precision, and I watched the Drathan delegates lean forward eagerly the moment she finished, ready to deliver the argument they had clearly prepared for weeks. Their lead representative, a narrow, sharp-voiced figure whose translated words carried a clinical, dismissive edge, rose to address the chamber. "What we have witnessed," the Drathan delegate said, "is precisely the instability we have long warned this council against. A sovereign mother abandoning her duties to pursue an unresolved personal matter on an undefended human world, provoking an uncontrolled civilian response that could easily have escalated into open conflict. This is not the behavior of a stable leader. This is the behavior of someone whose judgment has been compromised by attachment." Murmurs rippled through the chamber, and I felt my chest tighten as I watched several delegates nod slowly, clearly receptive to the argument being laid out before them. Then the chamber's presiding officer, an elder representative from a species I did not recognize, turned to Vesa and asked whether she wished to respond. Vesa rose, and before she could speak a single word in her own defense, I stood as well, my heart pounding, and asked, formally, for permission to address the council directly. A long silence followed, filled with surprised murmurs and sharp, curious glances, before the presiding officer, after a brief consultation with the delegates around her, finally granted my request. I stepped forward into the center of that vast, cold chamber, more afraid than I had been in 10 years, and I began to speak. "My name is Daniel Cole," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. 10 years ago, I was sent to Korvath Station as part of an experimental exchange program, one this council itself approved, built on the belief that two species with every reason to fear each other could learn, instead, to understand one another. I spent 11 months living among the hive, learning their language, their customs, their grief, and their joy, more closely than any human before or since. And during that time, I formed a bond with Vesa, the sovereign mother you see before you now, a bond I did not fully understand, and one I was not brave enough, at the time, to honor. I paused, gathering the words I had turned over during the long journey to this station. I left Korvath Station without saying goodbye, I continued. I ran from what that bond meant, because I was afraid of exactly the kind of permanence, the kind of responsibility, that standing here today represents. For 10 years, I told myself that leaving had been the right choice, that it protected both of us from complications neither of us had asked for. I was wrong. My absence did not protect anyone. It left a wound in an entire hive's collective memory, and it created exactly the vulnerability the Drathan Concord has spent months attempting to exploit. I turned, deliberately, to face the Drathan delegation directly. "You argue that Vesa's judgment is compromised by attachment," I said. "But I would ask this council to consider what happened 3 days ago, when 3 of your vessels attempted to seize me quietly, without witness, without accountability. Within minutes of Vesa's honest, open broadcast of the truth, 9 civilian ships, crewed by ordinary people, with no formal authority and no obligation to act, converged on our position from 3 separate systems, moved by nothing but a decade-old memory of what that exchange program once represented. That is not instability. That is exactly the kind of loyalty and trust this council claims, in its founding charter, to be trying to build between our peoples." I let the words settle over the chamber for a moment before continuing. "You call the response to Vesa's honesty proof of danger," I said. "I would call it proof that the peace this council has spent a decade cultivating is stronger and more deeply rooted than any of us fully understood, strong enough that ordinary people, given no orders and expecting no reward, chose to risk their lives defending it. If that frightens you, I would ask you to consider carefully what that fear reveals about your own intentions toward this peace, rather than what it reveals about Vesa's judgment." The chamber remained silent for a long, tense moment after I finished speaking, and I found myself holding my breath, uncertain whether I had helped Vesa's position or fatally undermined it with my inexperience in matters this delicate. Then, slowly, the presiding officer rose and turned first to the Drathan delegation and then to Vesa and finally to me. "This council," she said, her translated voice carrying a weight of formal authority, "will take the testimony offered today under full consideration. We will reconvene in 6 hours to render our judgment on the matter before us." As the chamber began to empty, delegates murmuring among themselves, I felt Vessa's hand close around mine, steady and warm, despite everything we had just endured. "Whatever happens in 6 hours," she said quietly, "I want you to know that what you did here today, standing before this council and speaking honestly, matters more to me than any judgment they could render." "We're not finished yet," I said, though I felt, for the first time since her ship had appeared above my house, a fragile, cautious hope beginning to take root where fear had lived for so long. "But whatever they decide, Vessa," I meant every word, "I'm done running from this, from you, from any of it." She looked at me for a long moment, all 6 of her eyes bright with something I had not seen from her since the earliest, gentlest days of our time together on Corvath Station, and then, together, we turned to wait for the council's judgment, whatever it would be. The 6 hours that followed were the longest of my life. Vessa and I waited in a small chamber near the main council hall, saying little, sitting close enough that our shoulders touched, both of us too aware of what hung in the balance to fill the silence with idle words. I thought about Miran's rest, about the quiet life I had built there, and how completely it had already changed in the span of a few days. I thought about Laura Bennett, Owen Blake, Ellen Marsh, Nathan Price, Charlie Doyle, and every other name I had learned belonged to people who had risked everything on a memory a decade old. I thought about the 11 months on Corvath Station that had shaped the rest of my life without my ever fully admitting it until now. When the summons finally came, calling us back to the council chamber, I felt Vessa's hand tighten briefly around mine, before she rose, composed and steady despite everything. The chamber was fuller than before, additional delegates having arrived in the hours since our testimony, word of the unfolding situation clearly having spread far beyond the original 11 powers seated on the council. I noticed, with some surprise, additional human representatives among the crowd, their expressions harder to read than the alien delegates around them, though I caught what might have been cautious respect in a few of their glances toward me as I took my place beside Vessa once more. The presiding officer rose, and the chamber fell silent. "This council has considered the testimony presented today with great care," she began, her translated voice carrying clearly through the vast space. "We have reviewed the events at the human colony known as Miran's Rest, the actions of the Drathan Concord's vessels, the response of independent civilian craft, and the personal testimony of both Sovereign Mother Vessa and the human Daniel Cole." She paused, and I felt Vessa's grip on my hand tighten further, both of us bracing for whatever judgment was about to be delivered. "This council finds," the presiding officer continued, "that the actions taken by the Drathan Concord in pursuing an unarmed human civilian through unlawful means, without council authorization, and without regard for the sovereignty of human-controlled space, constitute a serious violation of the treaty governing relations between all signatory powers. This council further finds that the civilian response witnessed at Miran's Rest, far from demonstrating instability, represents precisely the kind of organic, unforced trust between species that this council's founding charter was designed to encourage." A wave of murmurs swept through the chamber, and I saw the Drathan delegation's confident posture falter for the first time since we had entered the hall. "Therefore," the presiding officer said, "this council formally censures the Drathan Concord for its actions, and requires a full accounting of the methods used to extract information from Sovereign Mother Vessa's advisor 6 months prior, an act this council considers a grave violation regardless of the political motivations behind it. Furthermore, this council formally recognizes the bond between Sovereign Mother Vessa and Daniel Cole as complete and binding under Hive law, and extends to that bond the same treaty protections afforded to any other recognized diplomatic relationship between signatory powers." I barely heard the rest of the ruling, the formal language about protections and precedents and future council sessions, because the weight of what had just happened was still settling over me. Vessa and I were, officially, permanently, recognized before every major power in this region of space, and the danger that had followed me from Korvath Station for 10 years had finally, truly, been resolved. As the chamber began to empty once more, delegates rising and murmuring among themselves, Vesa turned to me, her plating shimmering with a warmth I had not seen from her since the earliest days of our time together, back when neither of us understood yet what we were building. "It is done," she said quietly. "The bond is recognized. The danger the Drathan hoped to exploit no longer exists, not in any form that could threaten either of us again." I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 10 years, and something in my chest finally loosened. A tension I had carried so long, I had almost forgotten what it felt like to be without it. "What happens now?" I asked. "For us, I mean. Not the Council, not the treaty, just us." Vesa considered the question carefully, the way she considered everything, with a patience I had always admired, even when it frustrated me a decade ago. "That," she said, "is a question I believe belongs entirely to you and me, and no council in this chamber has any authority to answer it on our behalf." We left the station together 2 days later, and instead of returning immediately to Hive territory, Vesa insisted on one final stop, back at Mirren's Rest, back to the quiet colony, where all of this had truly begun. I found, standing once more in the field behind my house, that the place looked different to me now, not because anything about it had changed, but because I had. The same sky stretched overhead, the same fields rolled toward the horizon, the same small, unremarkable house stood waiting, but I no longer felt like a man hiding from his own history. I felt, for the first time in 10 years, like someone standing at the beginning of something rather than the end of it. Lara Bennett found us there 2 days after our return, her cargo ship setting down in the same field Vesa's had first landed in, and she greeted me with a rough embrace and a look that told me she expected the full story, exactly as promised. "So," she said, arms crossed, studying Vesa and me with an expression somewhere between amusement and genuine relief, "I take it congratulations are in order? 10 years of running, and you finally stopped." "Something like that," I admitted, and found myself smiling in a way that felt unfamiliar after so many quiet, guarded years. Owen Blake arrived a day later, along with Ellen Marsh, and slowly, over the following weeks, others from that old, buried chapter of my life began finding their way back into it, drawn by the same stubborn thread of memory that had brought them to my defense above the skies of Mirren's Rest. I thought often, in those quiet weeks, about what Vesa had said to me in the aftermath of that first engagement, about the true nature of the reputation humanity carried quietly across the galaxy. I understood it fully now, in a way I never had during my years of formal linguistic training or my decade of careful, deliberate distance from everything Korvath Station had once meant to me. The galaxy did not fear humanity because of our weapons, or our fleets, or the scale of our ambition. It feared us because of exactly what had happened above my own quiet home, because when something we loved was threatened, calculation and self-preservation simply stopped mattering, replaced by something older and far harder to defend against, a stubborn, uncalculated refusal to let go. Vesa and I did not resolve, in those first weeks, every complicated question our reunion had raised. There were still details to settle, arrangements to make between 2 very different lives and 2 very different worlds, questions about where we would live and how often, about what role I would play within her hive, and what role she would play in whatever remained of my quiet human life. But for the first time since I had watched her ship's shadow fall across my house, none of those questions frightened me the way they once might have. On the evening before we finally departed together for Hive territory, to begin whatever came next in a life neither of us fully understood yet, I stood once more in the field behind my house, watching the sun set gently over Mirren's Rest, and felt Vesa's hand close around mine, warm and steady, exactly the way it had felt on the day everything began. "Are you ready?" she asked quietly. I looked out at the quiet colony that had once been my entire hiding place, at the sky that had once seemed so safe simply because nothing ever happened beneath it, and I thought of 9 ships appearing out of nowhere, of Lara Bennett's rough, familiar voice crackling through a comm channel unused for a decade, of a council chamber falling silent as I found the courage to speak. I'm ready, I said, and I meant it fully, without a single trace of the fear that had once sent me running from exactly this moment, 10 long years ago. Above us, the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, and somewhere among them, waiting patiently for our return, an entire hive that had never truly let go of me, stood ready to welcome me home, not as a stranger, not as an outsider, but as something I had spent 10 years too afraid to admit I already was. Family. And as Vesa and I turned together to board her ship, leaving the quiet fields of Mirren's Rest behind for a future neither of us could fully predict, I understood, finally and completely, that the galaxy's nightmare had never truly been about fear at all. It had always, from the very beginning, been about love, stubborn and uncalculated, the kind that crosses 10 years and countless star systems without ever once considering the cost, because some bonds, once truly formed, are never meant to be broken, not even by the vast, indifferent silence of space itself.